All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of the Killing Fields. Of course, with Freitas Pizzeria, and of course with Cultured Thug, the famous, the infamous. Um, we got a very special guest tonight. If you're like me and you've been in this kind of movement since 2016, you know that there has been various groups that have come and gone. Many of them fly by night, many of them since the whole kind of rise of, I guess, whatever you could call this dissident right, white nationalism, whatever they call it, from that onset in 2016 when it had a surge in popularity. There was Identity Europa, there was Vanguard America, there was TWP, there was various other groups. But one group, I have to say, has stood the test of time, has won the optics war, and ultimately probably will persevere out of all the groups. And with much further ado, I bring you Thomas Rousseau.
Hello, thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, thank you for being here
Thank you
with
for
us,
coming on.
Thomas. Yeah, especially so. I guess let's get it started, and this is, uh, uh, I guess, especially why I have gratitude for you for still coming on. There's a lot of people that could have just went through what you went through and said, "Hey, let's reschedule. Let me come back at another time." Not only did you stick to your appointment, but you said, "Ask me anything. It doesn't matter." So we'll start with the elephant in the room. Just recently, there was an information leak. There's an information hacking of your organization. And can we run through this? How did this happen? What do we know about this? And kind of run us through the history of it, your awareness of it, and then dealing with it.
Yes, absolutely, and I know there's quite a bit more to talk about since we haven't spoken in quite some time, and it'll be good to catch up. But yes, absolutely. So if you'll bear with me, originally, all of you should be familiar with our Washington D.C. demonstration, not the most recent one, but the one just before that in early December. We became initially aware of some form of foul play as we were marching back to exfiltrate the city, and as you can see in our video, some of our vehicles were attacked. And this actually did extend to a few people's personal vehicles even being damaged. Nothing which could not be managed and mitigated there on the spot, if not with some meager time delays, but something substantially troublesome. So we knew that something has happened. We knew that there was foul play. We knew that our regular planning process was steadfast, so there was something more going on. Now, the immediate concern was, of course, people's safety, assessing the situation and getting everybody home. But we knew our culprit, or at least we knew initially, who was being less than honest about themselves before I even got into the last box truck to leave the pickup site. Plans were already set in motion that moment. Now, after everybody was sent home, everybody was safe. Obviously, nobody was injured in any way. People settled back in, and we engaged in a very voracious investigation, a number of sweeps, audits of our whole system, social, digital, physical, everything you can imagine. We didn't know the full scope of the issue at first, but we caught on very quickly. As soon as we noticed a string or a series of strings of malicious code, remember this was a hack and not necessarily just a leak. This person had access to information which was not accessible in the usual context. It was an instant call to action, and our guys were able to shut out, lock out, and ban the hackers' attempts to break back in. And this guy, the person responsible, a half step above the usual mildew, if you want to call it that, but he was more incidentally creative than some sort of genius. The scope itself of everything is even very limited, and it only seems so great because of how active we are. If you're looking at the raw data files, the size can be deceiving. As soon as this guy was completely shut out, fuming in obscurity, we spent all of our time shoring up our defenses and systematically making these kinds of attacks impossible, impractical, infeasible. And, I can't discuss in detail, of course, the exact measures implemented because that would make them less effective. But I can say that they are numerous, they are effective, and they're constantly evolving, right? We are constantly up to date, keeping our eye on everything. And we were able to fight back effectively here because our men on our side were fighting to protect their brothers, to preserve what we all see as a valiant cause. And they were doing so together, right, as a team. And these other people were alone, sputtering away, and they were doing so only to destroy and to harass, to try to threaten and intimidate the rest of the world into being more like them, cowardly, insolent, and obscene, right? I said in Chicago that theirs is more affliction than ideology, and I uphold that. So after that, they were, of course, able to glean our attendance at the 2 March for Life events, which they could have done with a calendar, but because these were annual participations, and with weeks of planning ahead of time, they were able to arrange a paltry dozen to scream at us in both cities. We arrived completely unknown to them, proving the effectiveness of our immediate security measures, and we left completely unharmed in both cases. Their array, against us, in front of us, was one of gluttony and vulgarity. We saw disgusting hatred on display and wrathful insanity, gripping them vigorously. I think if it weren't for our men standing face to face with these creatures, it would be harder to convince them of our resolve moving forward. Not impossible, but more difficult, because I believe that made it so clear that these attacks are meant to incite fear, distrust, and paranoia. They say that themselves. And we have responded with courage, trust, and certainty in our efforts. They're meant to resolve our they're meant to harm our resolve to fight, but not our ability. And both of these things in our organization have been recast in steel. We have been pressed into a dire strait of necessity and change, and I think that is the very same kind of necessity which breeds innovation, and dynamism. They did their worst, and we're still standing. We are still sustaining. Now, there are other concerns. I have taken full responsibility for all that has happened, and I do, without question. I have spent every moment of my time working to correct wrongs and account for mistakes with all these lessons hard learned. This podcast is one of the few breaks of this work, aside from eating and sleeping and the usual necessities. And I think it's nonetheless very important. And, again, very happy for having me on. Even from the very beginning, with anybody who experienced unplanned expenses, we arranged fundraisers and have seen that everybody is fully compensated for anything. No one is at any personal loss because of this. And I have given everything that I have to spare, what little I have, to help these guys. Everything I have is as a result of the organization, so everything I have is to be given back to the organization. And I continue to bend all my efforts towards ensuring the safety of those involved. And there is no difference between my interests and those of the organization. In this context, in another context, in any context, I exist as a vessel. I'm not here to do it for monetary gain. If I was, I'm doing an absolutely terrible job. I'm not here to seek fame. I'm here to serve the nation, and the activists who are in the nation's cause are my constituency. They are to whom I am responsible, and they are to whom I represent. No one has been left behind. No one has been ignored, and no one has lost faith. The men have seen this in each other and in myself, and the central trust that our organization is founded upon remains intact, if not ever more so, by everything that's happened. We have been tested many times. There have been leaks, there have been attacks in the past, and many trials, and our opposition is always disappointed in our ability to rally around our ideals and band together. The blazing red chevron is called to mind. We place it on our cap. It's flying above our heads. It's staring at you on our shields. And it is a reminder that there is always one direction that we have to go, never back, always forward. And it's been kind of, unfortunate to see that a lot of people are using this as an opportunity to decry our organizing and even our cause by proxy. But also, I think many, many people have reached out with support and with solidarity in these times of need. With the faith that men united can make a difference. Now, I'm summarizing here. I apologize if I'm rambling, but these next few months are going to have some real challenges, and we all understand this. It's going to be difficult for some to take me at my word for what I'm saying now. I understand that, and I respect that. I'm not going to berate anybody who hasn't had, their concerns or hesitations, and that's why I was so honest with y'all about taking any questions. I'm going to answer everything. I'm not trying to hide anything. And I'm not going to be able to explain away all of the concerns with simple rhetoric, but I'm not alone. All of the guys, all of the men, all of the activists, all of the patriots who are involved and organizing are going to be able to show, more so than my words ever could, that we are undaunted, we are undeterred, and I want our supporters and detractors and people in the middle to know that we will continue our sustained efforts, and they should draw their conclusions from that. And I would say that summarizes the issue very well. And of course, as I said, I'm open to any and all questions before we move on into the rest of the year, the rest of the events, and everything in between.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I think your attitude is one of the big reasons why you've been able to sustain this brotherhood with Patriot Front, and why it's only gotten bigger as the years have went on, despite doxes, leaks, attacks, and all of these things, negative mainstream media attention, things like this. It's because of that mentality. I think it shines through. It always has, I think, since I first spoke to you till now. You've always kind of had that fight in you, right? And I think that shows. So I'm wondering so the first thing he does is he sets up this vehicle exchange attack, right? So this is before anything's come out. This is what made you realize, okay, something's wrong here, because no one should know where this is at. So do you think this was like an intimidation thing, like you don't know where we're at, or something like that, like a psychological attack to kind of put fear in, we're watching you, but you don't know?
Sure. It's really hard to glean the motivations of these people. They're very, their minds are corrupted and warped, and they have no sense of morality, and they're, wrathfully trying to destroy everything in their path so that the rest of the world reflects their insanity. It was most likely some combination of what you discussed. It was an attempt at intimidation, and that's this whole, everything they've been employing has been intimidation, right? They want you to be scared. They want you to be timid. They want you to step back. They don't want you to show up. And we've proven that once we do show up, all they have left is mockery. And when they run out of catchy, pithy slogans and jokes about, your clothes or your hat or the way you're standing or your, whatever, when they run out of jokes, they're just screaming or they're threatening to fight you. And obviously that doesn't work. And we found in, the recent events that they run out of their catchphrases, and they run out of their bile to spit really quickly. And I think it's like I said, it's made things very clear that once we get into the streets, once our boots hit the ground, there's not really a whole lot they can do to stop us.
If I may interject here, just briefly, I'm curious, Thomas, what measures have been taken to prevent what measures have been taken to prevent any of this in the future? And if so, I'm curious also, what kind of measures do you plan to put in like the real world in terms of protection for your group members, in terms of, preventing, preserving their sort of livelihood, and also legal protection, if I may say? Are there like any measures being put in to that regards?
Sure. So, we obviously started with the most immediate amendments, and those were on the technological and digital side. Those are varied, numerous, complicated, even beyond my understanding in a lot of cases. And I can't discuss those in detail, but those have been done, and our team is efficient, professional, and very hardworking. They have been staying up very late many nights, implementing new measures. As far as, more social things, right? Preventing these people from getting their foot in the door. Many measures have been taken on that side to bolster our ability to, determine the validity and the motivations of new members, and to ensure that everyone's conduct is applicable. Even beyond that, conduct across the board has been updated. Some people have gone so far as to assume the personal information or the identifying information that came out as a result of this malicious hack was a centrally collected database, and that's not true. These were pieces of information that individuals shared with each other on a peer-to-peer basis, outside of my accessibility. These are not things that I know. These are not things that anybody else knows. These people were simply trusting, their locals, people that they know and work with very consistently. And ultimately they were right to trust those people. It was simply a blind spot, which has now been covered. And moving forward, people will adhere to more strict guidelines on how to share certain pieces of information, and how to operate within the scope of not having certain pieces of information be in use. And obviously, that's a lot of specifics. Now, when it comes to people who may be experiencing any hardship, doxing is nothing new. And a lot of our members have had this sort of thing happen to them before, not only within the organization, but in past beyond that, before they joined. Sometimes a lot of guys have experience in this whole ordeal before even joining. We have come together, as I said, and we as an organization have a lot of resources in the the loyalties and the networks of our members, not only within our membership, but within the friends and sympathetic associates of our membership on an outside basis. And there is a vast array of resources available to anybody who is experiencing hardship. And I'm not going to be able to explain specifically who might be experiencing what, because that could incite further further attempts to harm them. But overall, the men are staying extremely courageous. Their spirits are unhindered, and no one has had no one's ending up on the streets. No one is running out of food on the table. No one is going to end up without work to do, place to stay, and valuable life goals being pursued with all haste. So across the board, everything that can be done is being done, if not has already been done. And a lot of it is, not, and I'm not micromanaging everything, of course. I'm not trying to take credit for all of these things. A great deal of these actions, of these initiatives, have been proposed and carried out by the activists, the local leadership themselves. And I have been absolutely inspired. Even myself, I have been inspired by my own organization. My own membership has inspired me so greatly to see them responding to something that came very unexpectedly, so confidently, so dynamically, and so boldly, just as we do everything else. And it's been great to see. If it, of course, it's in very unfavorable circumstances, but it has been great to see how bolstered everybody has been.
Well, that's how you learn the most, right? Is through the struggle. That's what you really learn about who you're surrounded by and things like that. Not during the good times. It's easy to have camaraderie then, but
no, it's certainly, it's you get pushed into a very hard situation, and giving up isn't an option, right? We made that decision a long time ago that we're not going to give up, we're not going to step down, and we're not going to be quiet. So then the only thing is, you have this big obstacle in front of you. You need to get past it. It's just a how question. It's not a why,
Mm-hmm. Now, speaking about, because Patriot Front is all over America, and obviously, like you said, you cannot micromanage. So you have to delegate responsibilities to people across the country, even when it comes to things like vetting. So this infiltrator, as he got vetted and got in, was there, like, back to hindsight 2020, was there something like you could go look back at the application or how he behaved, that's where even the vetting now is going to even get stronger or better, or where you could spot some things maybe this person exposed, so if it's shown again next time, it could be caught before they get in and are trusted?
Yes, absolutely. Our practices for these things have been updated, 2, 3, 4, 5-fold. And we have been able to effectively, distribute this information to everybody where it was learned in a specific case. It's a balance between having these semi-autonomous groups, with also having the benefits of a centralized structure, where we're able to share information and practices that can then have all of their implementation done on the local level. And this has given us the not only the information as a case study, in what we can do better, but also every single ounce and then some of the necessary motivation to spend those, hours looking over our practices and structures, going over documents and having meetings and planning calls, being creative with ideas. It has given us everything we need to improve. And realistically taken from us nothing that we couldn't live without when it came to completing our action, our activism, our networking, our community building, and our overall progress.
Now, is this, I don't know the answer to this, and I wonder if you do. Is this legal what this dude did? I mean, something has to not be legal about that, to get personal information, put people's personal names out there, to hack into files. Like, is this completely legal for them to do shit like this? Or,
Sure. I'm, again, I'm not a lawyer, and I can't speak to exactly how these things could be interpreted. Um,
Mhm.
Broadly, I would assume no. Am I going to, try to cooperate with law enforcement to find someone or anything of that nature? Extremely unlikely, borderline impossible. But in the principled sense, I would assume, based on my, again, non-professional and non-legally binding understanding of these things and the laws surrounding them, that no, it is not legal. And of course, attacking someone's vehicle is obviously not legal,
Yeah.
especially not conspiring to do so. And this is something that we need to realize, that you know these people are, if not in the pocket of establishment and police, they are at the very least so much less of a focus for them, even as they engage in so much crazier activities.
Mhm.
But the risks they took to commit themselves to these insane actions were far greater than any risk we took to prevent them from being able to do so, to block them out, to shut them out, to keep them in the dark. We have taken no effective, no legal risk in order to do that, and all of the risk has been on their end, where they're running around trying to hurt property. They're running around trying to break things. They've taken all the risk at that point.
Mhm. And like you said, because the powers that be really don't care for some reason about their violence and their destruction and all of this stuff. So yeah, I'm sure they'll never look into it or not care about it at all. Unfortunately.
No, and it is, you could say it's disappointing. Obviously, one of the binding principles of the organization is that we believe that the American people are a unique, ethnic group which has been descended from the pioneers, and we need to be represented by a government, legislature, apparatus, etc. And, this recognition that, law enforcement, police, these things, they're not on our side, and they're not going to help us. They're not going to prevent these things from happening, only further vindicates the original founding tenet of the organization, that the United States is no longer, quote, of America, right?
Hmm. Definitely. Pat, you have anything else on the docs, or do we want to move on?
I think he pretty much covered all of it, unless you want to take some questions from the chat concerning that. Some of them are rather incendiary, and some of them are relevant. I don't know who's Antifa, who's not. It's hard really to tell in terms of like the chat.
Yeah. How about they just ask like after the interview, and then
Yeah, yeah, we'll
Thomas, are
do
you cool
Q
with
and
that?
A.
Take some. Yeah.
Well,
Sure.
Yes,
Question.
yes,
I do
yes.
have one more. I do have one more emphasis. And you have covered the bases fairly well concerning the doxing. I just wonder with all these groups, because I was at one time in a group myself, and I'm sort of skeptical about their success, and considering that America is such a surveillance state,
Mm,
and that has every single surveillance apparatus, within its function, including Antifa, which most likely Antifa are probably feds themselves. And no doubt many of the journalists and Antifa kind of, and Megan Squire and these other people sort of work together
hmm
to try to isolate and spot people and activists. I just wonder if there is any means to protect many of our guys that are going into these groups. And I will say that there is a certain risk involved with you know involving yourself with activism, but at the same time, I just wonder if there's like just measures that could be implemented, and perhaps also, I'm wondering also the necessity also of going into kind of hot liberal hotspots and sort of urban centers as opposed to rural areas where there are many white people that are suffering from opiate overdoses, poverty, and many of these other things that have gripped America. What's your
Sure.
comment on that?
All right. So, the big question, why the big cities? And this is a question, I've gotten from time to time. And, it should be understood that our activism is very there's multitudes to it. We have activism on the very small scale with our thousands and thousands of our promotional material placements. We have banner drops. We have we stencil over graffiti and gang signs and things like that. We put up other sorts of signs, and we have wheat paste posters that go at intersections, and then that leads up to the larger actions, where you have lots of guys, going on hikes, lots of guys gathering and doing fitness training, and then all the way up to demonstrations, marches, what everybody knows, and the very large, very public actions. And there is sort of a spectrum in how large and how many people are involved in the scope of these actions. And for the demonstrations as they are, usually they are done in larger cities because the space for us to walk as a group of dozens and dozens of pedestrians without blocking traffic or blocking businesses or causing the total shutdown of a small town. The space for that is usually present in large cities, and usually if we are protesting something or we are intending to make a certain splash, if we are going to the site of a Federal Reserve building or a particular city hall or obviously a place of government, usually we are able to most symbolically present in large cities because of that. And although there are no necessarily sympathetic or easily to deal with police forces, the ones in large cities are usually more acquainted with large form political demonstrations, and they can be more easily predicted in how they might act. In these last two cases, we went to these cities because that's where the pro-life rallies were happening, and that's where it was stated that we would be, and we were rather honor-bound to show everyone that even in spite of calls, for us to be silenced, for us to be shouted down, we will approach, we will attend, we will speak, and we will be safely and orderly, processed through the city, through downtown. But we don't leave small towns, unattended by any means. And most of our action, everything other than demonstrations, happens in these locations. Everything from banners, posters, stencils, and stickers. You can drive through the countryside in some areas, and if you're very vigilant, you'll understand that these places are saturated with our material. Now, will the organization commit to any larger actions in these sorts of locations? Of course, it depends. Back when we protested Purdue Pharmaceuticals, that was a smaller town than we're used to, I suppose, with Chicago and Washington.
If I may
But the
ask, where
upheavals
was
were
that
big.
exactly? The Purdue Pharma
It was in
protest.
Connecticut. It was in front of their headquarters in Connecticut. It's not in a massive city. It slips my mind right now, but it's smaller to medium size. I think it really depends. It really depends. Obviously, I can't say we're going to be somewhere in particular, but I think 2022 is the year for new things. I think it's the year for switching up our model a little bit, which we've tried to do in these last two demonstrations. And I think we're going to keep that up. So, what was your first question, just to clarify?
Well, my first question was, basically just what means do you have, and also somebody in the chat said something
Mhm.
about encryption. You can decide if you want to answer that or not. That's
Okay.
up to you. But I
Yeah, go
think
ahead.
you answered my initial question.
Okay. Yeah, as far as encryption, that would kind of fall under the realm of digital things that would be better left undiscussed in order for them to be safe and
Okay.
effective. Things could be encrypted, other things could not be encrypted. Everything could be unencrypted or encrypted. Who knows? But everything is safe, and we're doing the best we can all the time to ensure that things stay that way.
Okay. I think we've addressed everything in the docs.
All right.
Let's move on.
All right. And just to point out too, because like Thomas was saying, some people now might be a little skeptical. If you look at Patriot Front's history, they do not get their members locked up. Okay. They do not have their members beating up these people that are yelling at them, harassing them, or anything like that. They have a long track record of protecting their members, actually. And it's only through, actions like this that anything negative ever even comes out. So I would say people would have to consider that too. You'd have to look at the history and what they've done and how many times they've done it. And
Of
like,
course.
yeah, the very low amount of problems that's come from that. So last time we spoke, you had been to DC before, and at that time, I thought that was impressive. Up until the last before the anti-abortion, the pro-life rallies, the Washington D.C., the big one. I thought this was the greatest spectacle, the greatest form of propaganda, the greatest form of messaging that Patriot Front has brought together. Not only because of the time of day, where you did it, but your social media game as well as that, which played all these people so perfectly to get as many eyes on you as possible. And correct me if I'm wrong, I think that had to be uh, your biggest exposure. And I would imagine it's garnered the most people looking into Patriot Front now to even become members. So would you agree? Was that like the breakthrough, because after that you're everywhere now. Patriot Front's all over social media, all over mainstream news's lips now, all unified. They're all horrified, of course. But I thought for what you try to do with Patriot Front, like that came together perfectly, and it was your best form. I thought, till date.
Yeah, no, of course. And I do believe, of course, I would have to check the metrics. These last two events have been very public themselves, but I believe, in December, the Washington March has trounced all others in how public it was and how many people saw us, not just the thousands of people on the streets themselves, but the millions and millions of people who saw it. And I think, the organization is becoming, nearing the status of a household name. And the more people that are aware of us, the more people that will be drawn to at least see tidbits of our message. And when the media and these rabid commentators say such falsehoods and misconceptions about us, whether it's on the side of their feds or they're evil, they're genocidal maniacs, when that is contrasted with actual video footage of us marching, of us demonstrating, of us being what we are, there's a cognitive dissonance there. If we are truly what they say they are, then why are we shouting strong families, right? How do they make that work? So people are drawn to our message, people are drawn to learn more. And if the media didn't already need to lose more credibility, they've been doing a fantastic job of it, even among conservative circles who have been very quick to denounce us. Even many of them have been coming to grips with our reality. And a lot of that was planned. A lot of it was luck in DC. Just how many people picked up on it. I was fully prepared for it to be just another, not a drop in the bucket, but a big push, but nothing tremendous, no massive breakthrough. But that's what it ended up being, and we have certainly been taking every opportunity to use this to push forward our cause and push forward our ideas, and also push forward, the credibility of our actions in general.
Yeah. One of the oddest reactions, and I didn't see this coming. I guess I should have, but was from a lot of the conservative tier TPUSA type people that immediately jumped to the accusation of feds. And part of the reasons they were using, like, just made me laugh so hard because they're not fat. They're organized.
Hmm.
They have uniform. Where do they get these uniforms? I don't know. Where do you find khakis and blue jackets at? I mean, it's like it's so hard to have these things, and people cannot purchase these things. What did you think? Because we know what the left is going to say all the time, right? You're either going to be a Fed or white supremacist or Nazi, like you said. You're either genocidal or something else. You know what the left will. But when you have even people who would probably, if they looked at what you guys were saying and looked at your website about your beliefs, I think they would agree with a large portion of that. So you have people out there that who you're potentially speaking to their interest, and they immediately go and attack you guys as federal agents just because you're not. Did you see that kind of response coming, especially because they're not fat, like being one of their main things, main reasons why you guys were feds?
No, it was surprising, and we'd all seen these kinds of arguments before. The whole Fed accusation is nothing new on the political spectrum. It's been around since Feds started doing that sort of thing of infiltrating and manipulating and doing what they do, which is, I don't know how far back that goes, but it's probably a good long while. And you said a lot of these people would visit, they would view, and they would agree with the whole, a great deal of our message, if not it in its entirety. At the very least, seeing our message themselves would invalidate the critiques levied against us. And I think that's why. I think that's why a lot of these, these top conservative commentators, these very comfy suit puppets, they came out with these arguments in order to stymie that process, because these people want their audiences to be placated, comfortable. They want them to be paying for their subscriptions to the Daily Wire. They want them to be, tuning in every Saturday. They don't want them out on the streets. They don't want them to stop paying for the junk food. They don't want revolutionary conduct. And, revolution is a principle. It's not a tactic. It's not going in and, breaking down the doors to a building. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. Revolution is something which you embody. It is a principle of lifestyle and change, and viewing everything that is, everything that builds up the norm of society in which our people are discriminated and, denounced and disenfranchised, and changing that and turning it on its head and having a message and a lifestyle and an ideal in which our people, as their unique group and our heritage and descendancy, as well as our future, is put at the top, whereas they would put it at the bottom. And I think a lot of people came out with these misconceptions and misinformation in order to combat that. But, as I've said previously, the whole argument of nobody's ever heard about these guys, you can only use that once. And every second time, the lion has no teeth,
Yeah, definitely not. So that's, I wouldn't even go into spike in membership. I'm sure that had to happen for that. Like I said, that was the biggest splash I've seen you guys. I think I've seen any kind of dissident right group make in modern history that I can think about, at least in the last 10, 20 years, at least, because I'm sure you're aware it was worldwide, literally worldwide. So it was well done. I say well done, well played. Thankfully, everything worked out for that. And then you go into the March for Life rallies now. So you saw the conservative reaction from a lot of these people because they want to keep, their supporters on the reservation, right? They don't want them looking at anything else and going there. Like you said, they want them subscribing and funding these people so they can continue to sell them this bill of goods that never comes through. So when you go to the March for Life, I've seen some of the video. I've seen very positive reaction from the people marching there towards you guys. I've seen the negative from the Antifa types, but what was that sentiment like? And I'm sure there was some of them that were like, oh, guys, stay away from us. You're fascists and all of this. But what were some of the positive reactions were you getting? And did you expect that? And if not, why didn't you? And if you did expect it, why did you?
Sure. And in years past, we've had a lot of really overwhelmingly positive interactions. And of course, there's always going to be some negatives. But this year was certainly the most polarizing, which I think is somewhat of a microcosm of broader, society in the United States, where everybody's picking sides. And certainly a lot of people fell into one category or another in our last two actions. We did have a lot of people, both in Chicago and Washington coming up and being very interested. A lot of people haven't heard about us before, and that's understandable. So they're interested, they're maybe a little bit confused, maybe a little bit shocked about what they see. Lots of inquisitive eyes. And in Washington, we're actually, obviously there was the police and there were the screaming counter protesters, but we were actually able to hand out quite a good deal of flyers, reaching over the bike cops and, all those people trying to separate us. But we're able to interact with those people. We were able to hand out flyers and have some very, exchange words very shortly and very briefly because of the march was going past us. But I think we had a lot of positive perception. And of course, there are also the negatives, but the key thing is that we're there, right? We are there, and these events have radical opposition, right? You have people, and I'm sure we're going to be publishing more of the video and more of the photos, and that's out there for people to find already. There are 100,000 journalists there, but the people that came out to oppose this pro-life rally in Washington D.C. were some of the most dissatisfying to witness people I have ever come across, and that is in political activism. That is having been everywhere I've been. You had half naked, black women screaming with like effigies of dead babies hanging around their necks. You had women screaming, like staring at me with bloodshot eyes, pointing and screaming about how that they're going to kill me, which didn't seem to happen, and also wearing signs saying, why just kill babies when you can eat them too? Just completely inhuman, disgusting behavior. And I walked around the city beforehand because I like to see what I'm doing. I like to get a lay of the land. And there were posters put up all over the city where tens of thousands of families and kids, student groups and stuff like that would be walking through, telling people how to self-administer abortions. And I'm not even going to go into that, but that is not even accounting for how unsafe and ridiculous that is. That is abhorrent, and these are the people that came out to protest this event. And when we showed up, we acted as a bit of a magnet, as we do, and every single one of those disgusting individuals gravitated straight towards us, and they shouted and they screamed, and they were met with nothing. And then when we left the march, they left with us, and every single one of those people was drawn away from the march when we left. And I hope that they were able to have a much, much better experience in the city as a result of that. I think that was one of the benefits. And in Chicago as well, there's people that support us, there's people that don't. But either way, we're there. And that's one of the big messages to stay, that you can like Patriot Front, you can dislike Patriot Front, you can be somewhere in the middle, but either way, we are a fact of the political landscape. We are here, and we're not going anywhere. And you can make your opinions, and I hope you pick the right ones, right? But at the end of the day, we're still going to be here, and people need to come to terms with that. And I think that's a big thing that these events showed to the world, to the country, to the media, and to a lot of the people that hadn't already made up their minds.
Would it make sense to do activism like that again with other conservative meetups, or things that you're going to have? It's not just a Patriot Front thing, but like you said, here we are. Is it going to make sense to maybe show up to a couple more things like that in the future, or is that just too much strategy?
Well, that's definitely something that could be in the books for 2022. And of course, it depends, right? It depends on the location. It depends on the people. The conservative spectrum is wide, and there's a lot of people who have a lot more in common with us, and there's a lot of people who have a lot less in common with us. I'm sure you're very familiar with that. It would really depend. It would really depend. Of course, I couldn't, do too much inside baseball. But yeah, I think, that is something, maybe not exactly in the same way, maybe not exactly in the same sort of setting. But I think a lot of, 2022 is going to have a lot of outreach. It's going to have a lot of people who know more of what we're about and, accept that in a positive way. And it's not as if we haven't been doing some things like that already. We've been pretty active when it comes to handing out flyers, at larger events where there might be sympathetic people. Whenever there's a big political, say what you will about Trump, I'm not a supporter. I'm not a Trump fan, and haven't been for a very, very long time. And nobody in the organization endorses politicians, or Trump especially. But there are good people at the rallies that go on. There are good people who are still in this milieu that should be reached out to. They should be aware of the alternatives, and I think that's a big component. Last year, when we protested the cancellations of these pro-life rallies, in Chicago, they couldn't do a rally, right, because of the weird COVID restrictions. Even though that was put impartially on them, or it was they were discriminated against because of their stance in the city. And when we were marching anyways, right, when they say, oh, you can't have groups of more than 2 or 3 or whatever going through the streets, we marched through the streets anyways because we don't need the government's permission to march. Their caravan went right past us, that was last year, and they were waving, they were honking their horns, and again, with a horn honk you can't really tell, but they acknowledged us, right? And that is, just another example of saying, Patriot Front is an example. Patriot Front is an abolition of excuses for inaction. Patriot Front is something that you see, and then you look at your own reasoning about, why don't I do this? Why am I afraid of this? Why don't we do that? And we are the answer to those questions, I like to think.
You're definitely in the political consciousness now. Like you said, there's no way around it now. Have you been paying attention to, I know you're a busy man, but have you been paying attention to kind of any of the modern politics and a possible Trump run again in 2024? And like, what would you think about something like that? And how would you or us and the dissidents use this to our advantage after seeing how 2016 and 2020 played out with Trump? Do you see that as a positive thing to take advantage of, or is it like, just get the hell out of here, guy, or we already know what you are, just leave already?
No, I'm on a bit of a social media detox lately, but I hadn't known that Trump was did he say directly that he was planning to run
He said
again?
There's just a video that came out where he's hitting
Right.
golf, and someone goes, the 45th president of America. He goes 45th and 47th. So I mean, he's implying, I guess.
Yeah,
that,
definitely also seems like something he would just say for the sake of
yes,
saying it.
definitely, yes, 100%.
But that would be interesting. Obviously, we shouldn't throw our lot behind a presidential candidate. We've, people have learned that too many times, and that's off the table. But in terms of, the next election season is going to be very interesting, right? A lot has happened, and I think, it was expected almost that Biden was going to issue in, a period of, of relaxation and stability. The grownups are back in control, and everything goes back to, like stock photo neoliberal wonderland where there's one of every type of person, and it's like a cartoon. But that didn't happen, right? And I think a lot of people have realized that maybe the problems are a little bit deeper than that which can be resolved by exchanging one senile sock puppet for another senile sock puppet. So the next election cycle is going to be very interesting. And if Trump runs again, and if he tries to do what he did in 2016, I think a lot of people aren't going to go along with it because of his track record. I think a lot of people will. I think a lot of people will be kind of roped right back into it because there's a billion dollar industry in political, campaigning and electioneering to keep people on that sort of plantation, right? To keep them coming back, right? You get their attention, you get their loyalty, you get their vote, you screw them, and then you spend the next 4 years trying to get it back. But I think the next elections, the election season is going to be a really big opportunity for people to try to throw a wrench in that cycle, right? Of dissatisfaction, of alienation, of disenfranchisement. And one of the biggest things that PF is, interested and engaged with is putting forward the notion and argument of legitimacy, right? Like, what separates the government from just a bunch of documents and guys with badges, right? It's the fact that enough people, either through intimidation or affiliation, see the government as the legitimate governing body, right? They're the one that makes the rules. You follow the rules because you have to, right? Mm-hmm. That can change, right? And that is what changes whenever a new government comes about. History is long, and the United States hasn't existed forever. America has existed longer than the United States, and America will exist longer than the United States. So I think, targeting that sense of legitimacy and that understanding that the nation is not the state, right? That the nation, can, should, and must outlive this sort of dilapidated system. And, getting people to make the realization and make the commitment to not get fooled, not get entrapped into another 4 years of hysteria, because Patriot Front has survived an entire election season now, or a whole presidency, I should say, and we've seen the kind of progression and the kind of development in the lives of our members, within this time that Trump couldn't do for his supporters, right? Not with their credibility. So what we've been able to do is pose the question then, why do you need someone in office? Why do you need another puppet in office to make these changes for your life when you can band together with like-minded guys, with a collective of strong nationalist men, and make them yourself? I think that's a big question.
Why don't we talk about some of your members real fast? Because I don't think this is something, every time we've spoken, I don't know if we've gone over this. Maybe we have.
Sure.
But something I don't think you get enough credit for is, like you're saying, what can Trump do for his supporters, his members? What can he do? What Patriot Front does for its members. Now, we were joking, I don't know if we did it on stream or off stream, but about a Vice article, like, oh, look how bad these guys are. They're talking bad against porn and junk food and obesity and things like this. They want their members to be better. What about that? Can you not obviously not a specific name, but can you give me some examples of some people that have come into Patriot Front, maybe a little too fat, maybe drinking too much booze, maybe something wrong in their life, and being involved in this brotherhood of Patriot Front has made them better men and better people? Can you just run us through? Because I'm sure there's stories like that. So not specifics, just kind of generalize as much as you can.
Yeah, and I think a big understanding is that nobody comes into the organization perfect, right? Nobody knows, very few people know how to march, very few people know how to participate in these sorts of levels of street activism. So everybody is on equal footing when they first join, in having a ton of crap to learn really fast. It's kind of a do or die, sink or swim. And obviously we have people to help them out, but a lot of guys, come in with, and there's a lot of things we can teach, but there's one thing that I can't give anybody, and that's that kind of fire, that spirit to achieve, to act and to believe, right? To have that sort of faith and that sort of hope in what we believe in. And the guys who come in there, there have been guys who have lost, there's one guy who joined, and he was isolated, geographically, and since he's joined, he has a lot more guys near him. He's built up some really strong connections, not only in the group but in his personal life. You're talking networking with with families and jobs and those sorts of things. With going to other guys' gyms and training with physical training, martial arts, all that sort of stuff. And he's lost tens and tens of pounds in the process. I looked at the guy at one of our events last summer, and I kind of had pulled him aside and I said, hey man, I'm happy you came out. I'm happy that you did as well as you did, but all things considered, man, no offense, but look at you, you're having some trouble here. What do we do about this, right? I'm not insulting the guy, but PF is where we're going to be honest with you, because it's not just a matter of friendship, it's a matter of stakes. If someone can't keep up, the whole march has to slow down, right? Because we can't leave people behind. And I think that's a huge mentality which drives this success, because in like other groups or self-improvement groups, there's not those kinds of stakes. So since then, that particular individual has he's lost tens of pounds. The exact number escapes me, but I saw him again the following I don't know, months later, the dates escape me, but I had to take a double take because I barely recognized him. You could see his jaw, his profile when he was standing side to side to you was straight down instead of bowed out. And he was able to go through a really rough hike with the guys, and he was doing better than other newer guys, other skinnier guys, and that was a testament not just to what he had done physically, but also what he had done mentally. It may have been harder for him to climb that mountain than it was for a lighter guy, but he was more motivated because he had more on the line. And there have been other guys, who have come into the organization during a pretty rough, or not necessarily a rough time in their lives, but a time where a lot of things were changing, and it was an opportunity for them to change things about themselves and their broader life direction. We have guys who used to be drug addicts, or they used to be involved in very negative spaces, and in their process of changing these things in their lives and their lifestyle, they found the organization. And they have come to me at one point or another and said, all of these things that I did were great: getting sober, getting active, getting healthy, distancing myself from those kinds of people that led me to those things. But they said that if it wasn't for the organization, I wouldn't have been able to keep up with it. If it wasn't for the positive influences of these new friends that they've made, at these new connections, these new initiatives, and that inspires me more than anything, because a lot of people think about victory and these grand schemes as something which has to happen years down the line. It has to happen so far away, and there's all these specifics. But we need to understand that we're fighting for these everyday victories that build and build and build into greater and greater things. And when I see something like that happen with a guy, you don't want to get too dramatic about it, but we have the opportunity to save people from the world as it is, which is hateful and spiteful, and we can offer them a space which is healthy, which is motivated, which is dynamic, and which is fulfilling. So yes, absolutely, those are a few examples, and they're not unique. Very similar words could be said about a lot of guys, and if it isn't even the physical or the lifestyle things, seeing guys who have the opportunity to exercise leadership capability, right? Because you're going through your regular life, a lot of guys don't find out that they could be a capable or effective leader, that they could make decisions under pressure, until they have the opportunity. And no one else is going to give you that opportunity. I've seen, young guys, come into leadership roles and prove themselves in ways that nobody else in their family or their job or anything, they don't know that side of them, because they've never been pressed to succeed like they have in the organization. It's inspiring, it's encouraging, it's fulfilling for me as well as them.
Oh, I bet. So speaking on that, like kind of the theme of brotherhood, you've come from a defunct organization where, things weren't that great. And this is what led you into Patriot Front to say, well, I see what went wrong. Let me try to make something right.
Mhm.
And it's been years now, like you said, about 4 years now, right? Since,
Yes. Maybe
so
closing in on 5 probably, but yes.
closing. So there you go. So talk to me a bit about brotherhood and the strength of brotherhood and how you've started to experience it, like how you live it now. Now you literally have a brotherhood around you. Why don't you tell the people a little bit about how that's grown in you? Have you recognized that and how that's been created with Patriot Front?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the biggest thing to compare, you started out by saying, how far we've come since 2017. And this is a change I've not only noticed inside the organization, but between organizations and between individuals. That the type of drama and craziness, backstabbing and bickering, petty nonsense has really diminished over the months and the years. And I hope it diminishes even further, because even if people have their differences, there's you're not going to settle those differences in a comment section. You're not going to settle them in a forum, or you're not going to settle them in a chat room either. Best to leave it be. But I think getting away from all of that was the biggest thing that I wanted to do back in 2017, and we've gotten to the point where I can imagine not only Patriot Front back when it first started, but other organizations, that were contemporary to that time. And I've been thinking, what would they do? What would we have done then if we were faced with the same challenges we have these last few months? And that's a scary thought. That's something that's nasty. Just think about just how poorly a lot of guys could have handled it, how crazy things are or would have been, and it's made me all the happier to see just how great things are now. People are more professional. People are more, caring for one another. There's a lot of greater flow of information and action. There's not the kind of pettiness, right? Because with a brotherhood, you have the benefit of, well, the brotherhood of the organization is exemplified in, our shield wall, right? When we get out there, we to put up a wall, guys know that the guy standing next to them is just as much there to look out for him as he is for everybody else, as he is for as you are for him. And that's not something which is only experienced in ideological matters, but it's tactics, right? It's methods. Like these guys drill to be able to do this, and thankfully our shield walls have never really been tested in that instance. But a big part of it is so they don't have to be, so that people don't even bother. And I think that brotherhood has permeated our tactics, it's permeated our message, it's permeated our ability to sustain each other and to sustain our actions. Seeing how people have come together for anybody in need, whether it's financially, whether it's socially, even if someone just needs a moment to talk, someone to talk to, right? Because everybody has their personal lives. Guys have trouble. Guys could have trouble with family. Whether it's their older family, their younger family, families they've made, families they've been born into. Whether it's work, something happens. We got to realize that bad things, happen to good people as a rule in modern society. And even regardless of anybody getting doxxed, regardless of doing activism, bad things happen to people. People have mistakes. People lose jobs. People get put in bad situations by the world. And our organization is something which makes it safer to be a nationalist, safer to be an activist, because you're there with it, and there's that common understanding. And everybody knows that when they're giving something, when they're participating in one of our fundraisers, or when they're driving out of their way to go pick someone up whose car broke down, or they're going to help someone move, or they're offering someone a room for a couple days if they're passing through, or maybe they couldn't stay where they were, right? Everybody knows that it's almost unspoken that he would do the same for me if the roles were reversed, so he doesn't need to ask, right? Mm-hmm. Offers come in and people put it out there, and it's amazing. It's amazing to see. It's amazing, but it's also even more amazing to be participating in. And without getting into any details, I've been out and about a lot recently, and I have been able to tap into this amazing network, and get associated and get acquainted with some of our activists like never before. And it is, of course, I'm biased. I'm always more excited to be a member of the organization. I'm always, more happy to see what's going on. But I think it's great. It's great.
Oh, it is. Yeah. And you should be. Like I said, I think that even if people don't know, I think it shows with your success and how you've improved year after year after year. You've just gotten better. It's like, I think people forget you've kind of grown up in this thing, and you've kind of had to take the horse by the reins, so to speak, and kind of drive this thing. So it's I think it's noticeable for anyone that's known of you for all these years now. Like, you could see the growth in it. You can see the strength and the unity in the people there. So you see there is a sentiment of brotherhood and people looking out for each other. Which, like you said, bad things happen to good people today. That's just a part of modern day America. It's like people have to accept that. To have a extended family around you too, I mean, it's a very powerful thing.
Of course. And it's a binding philosophy of why we're here. It's binding, practice and principle. And an organization exists to turn principle into practice, right? Because we want the barrier between the space of idea and ideology to be, in the space between action and where we put that into effort to be as small as possible. And the organization exists to translate between ideal into action. And the past has been showing that, it's one thing to speak about all the difficulties we've faced in the past few months. But it's another thing to explain just how much we've grown, just how much we've learned. And I think we've been set up for a very good 2022. I know it's still very very new in the year, and I think PF's New Year follows somewhere around the end of January, because we always end up working hard and hard and hard, and we always have about a month of wrapping up all of our loose ends. So this is kind of our New Year's Eve right here. It's very exciting.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if 2022 was even better than 2021. With the way it's trending right now. Once again, I think you said it. You're part of the political consciousness. There's no way to erase that now. Everyone's aware Patriot Front is a presence. They're there. and it's going to be something they have to deal with, which of course you have to understand. It means they're going to start be gunning for you a lot more too. So there's
We're
always have
well
to be
used to
aware
that
of that.
now.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I'm sure. What is something in for anyone curious about becoming a member of Patriot Front, what is something that you will not stand for in Patriot Front, and then that you would immediately ban someone? Like, what is something that of conduct of character that you guys do not want around you, and if people are like that, don't even try?
Sure, sure. Well, obviously honesty and integrity. We don't want anybody lying about who they are for the sake of nefarious ends. But also, it's that key motivation. We need guys to have a certain level of idealism and understanding about what, not only what we do, but why we do it. Now, guys can disagree about the precise implementation. Guys can say, well, maybe we should do our activism like this. Maybe we should be doing a little bit more of this, and maybe even a little bit less of that. But at the end of the day, we need to have the absolute understanding that our course of action is just, that we are, noble in our cause. And like I said earlier, everything that can be taught, right? We can teach guys how to lose weight. We can teach guys how to diet. We can teach them how to march. We can teach them how to make wheat paste. We can teach them all these things, but the ability to learn cannot necessarily be taught, right? That's something a lot more innate, and that's something that a guy has to make a decision within himself. And for the people that are motivated, and especially, I think that the members that we get, these next few weeks, and in the early part of this year, are going to be some of our best ever, because I think, it's going to take a lot of confidence and a lot of real initiative to see through the misinformation, to see through the hysteria, to see through, the calls for cowardice and, being timid, and make that decision anyways. And not only to make that decision, but to complete, the process of getting in and getting active and getting acquainted. I think the members that we're going to be seeing soon are the best we'll ever have. And I hope some of the people who are going to change my life for the better, who are going to have the ability to change the lives of others, who are going to revolutionize and innovate our organization in, next year and the year after that. I hope some of them, at least a few of them, are listening to this right now. I hope, everything I've said has had, a positive impact, because that's why we're here.
Mm-hmm. Do you notice, this might be too much inside baseball too. I was going to say, do you notice bumps in membership after events, or is it like, would you attribute it to the media attention, the consistent flyering and banner dropping and activism like that? If you had to, I don't know, it might be too much inside baseball. That's on you if you want to say.
Sure. Well,
Yeah.
there's an interesting answer to the question, for sure. So we definitely notice on the first stages, because without going into detail, as you said, the vetting, it has stages, it has phases, and things take time. So actually, a lot of the way that our process is built is to sort of to middle out the big spikes, because for the safety of the organization, we couldn't add dozens and dozens of new people all at once, because that could cause its own issues, right? But when we get into huge spikes, we do get them on the front end. We get them on people applying and being initially interested. But once people get into the process, it's actually able to sort of even out, and the flow becomes much more stable. So we actually experience pretty steady growth throughout our actions, because people, because things take time, and because even, during our downtime, people are still working and recruiting others. A lot of the recruitment to the organization is word of mouth, right? Well, obviously people share the content, but it's someone that knows a guy, right? And even more, it's people that see our action in person, right? People that see, they run across our stickers in their town. They see one of our banners while they're driving to work. And maybe they already knew about us, right? Because a lot of people already know about us. But for a lot of guys sympathetic, all that it takes is for them seeing something in person to realize, hey, there's guys near me, or at the very least, there's guys that were here, right? So maybe I'm not so alone. Maybe there's someone around here that shares my ideas and is willing to put that forward. And people see that and people respect that. So does it spike? The interest spikes and the initial phases spike, but we're able to manage that pretty effectively. And moving forward, we're going to be even more diligent. Because we want our our vetting process and our membership, all that evaluation to be just as safe for us as it is for the person on the other end. Because while we're trying to get to know someone, while we're trying to see if someone is not to be offensive or anything, but worth it, right? Worth our time, because our time is very valuable. And we have a right to have high standards because of the stakes involved. We also want them to be safe. We want them to be confident. We want there to be that trust between us. And that's something difficult for a lot of guys, but I think I think we have the ability to prove it.
Now, this might be too much inside baseball too. So once again, if I'm asking something and it's
No,
too
no,
much,
no,
just
go
that's
ahead.
fine.
Yeah, sure.
I was just wondering, like, let's say within a year period of someone joining Patriot Front, are they within that year period? Will they meet you personally? Is that a mandatory thing, or I know. See, that's I knew.
Yeah.
I know.
Well, it really depends, I guess. Personally, it depends on what you mean by personally. Of course, we have events in which everybody's invited.
Like
so,
if they'll be physically, physically.
Oh yeah, no,
in
absolutely.
your presence.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Well, so if anybody's planning to sneak a knife into a meeting or something like that, you've just given them a great.
No, see,
But,
that's why I didn't want to.
No. No. So absolutely, yes. I would say at least once a year, depending on where you are. Obviously, people close to me, wherever I happen to be, obviously are going to meet me more often. If you're lucky, I'll even spend a night sleeping on your couch at some point during the year. I'll pass on through. But yeah, so yeah, it's very likely, at least once a year, and most of the time it'll be, for the demonstrations, it's always so rough because there's always so much to do, and the schedules are so tight that I don't really have an opportunity to sit down and actually get to know guys. So guys will come up to me and they'll say, "Hey, how's it going? Here, do you remember me from XYZ? We talked there," and I was like, I'm really sorry. I was so caught up with the whole action. I was so caught up with the plans and everything that I didn't, commit all that to memory. But we have other events that are actually a lot more bent around, that sort of social time and that sort of, that sort of quality, getting to know guys. And I think that's when we did really well with all of our hikes. When we did that, we had a big coordinated, mountain climbing trek video, where I gave a big speech and stuff like that. But there was so much more than that. It was ability for guys to have kind of a private, discussion and chance to work alongside each other in something that is, safe in the political sense. Obviously, it can still be risky to climb a mountain, but the risks you're facing are different, right? And being able to spend time with guys on a kind of a person-to-person basis on something which wasn't very complex, it was just difficult physically, was really great. And I want to do a lot more of that this year, because we just had three big events and Washington, Chicago, and Washington again. And and I think it's time for me to get a lot more personally acquainted with a lot of the guys. Because it's easy for people to get the misconception about me and about what I do. I really am, I guess regular is a subjective term, but I'm there's a lot of misconceptions, and I'm really just I'm very simple in my motivations. I just want the organization to succeed. I want what's best for the guys, and I think it's a lot better to have that understanding and and kind of simpatico when you're there on the ground with the guys and you're able to actually talk to them. Because I do think all the guys are my brothers, right? I represent them. It's my job to it's not just my job. When I say job, it sounds like it's an occupation, right? Like like you're an employee. But no, it's my passion. It's my life's goal to seek their betterment, to seek their ideals, made manifest. And I think that kind of learning and friendship is a key component. So yes, absolutely. To answer your question in the long form, yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So what other thing, and Pat, if you want to hop in here with any questions, that would be fine. Just one more thing is as far as with leadership and maybe even for the newer leaders coming into your organization or just young people that are going to be put in leadership roles. You've kind of grown up with this, created this, was the leader of it. How do you draw the line between serious and social when it comes to leadership roles? Because I know there's a very fine line between that, and a leader that's too sociable is not going to get the respect, and a leader that doesn't have any socialness to him is not going to get the brotherhood kind of concept. So Can you kind of talk about that for people interested in that, or how to deal with a group of men in a leadership position? Like, what have you learned in your last 4 years at
Hmm.
Patriot Front?
Yeah, no, that is a tricky thing, and it's something which is always adapting, because that's something which you always need to be mindful of. That's one of those practices and goals that is never completed. You're always having to be mindful of guys' conduct and their behavior, and that's a big thing. And I think I tell the guys, especially in the realm of integrity, that our message is our belief. Our message is our conviction. There is no space between what we say and how we act. Integrity is how you act when no one's looking. But you might find out that people are looking, and you need to be, as you are, right? You need to be, fulfilled in that. And when it comes to balancing that, I think it just comes down to some general practices. You can be friendly. And you can crack jokes, but I think the line usually goes into, and this is something that a lot of guys have issue with, because we come from, well, a lot of guys at least come from spaces of online, chatter and social spheres that are in the digital space, and there's a lot more. There's a lot more profanity and vulgarity and obscenity in these spaces, because people talking to each other online on social media, there's no filter, right? People just dump their head onto Twitter or Gab or whatever, and it's a mess, right? But when you get in person, some guys find out pretty fast that they'll make one of those jokes that would have done the numbers on Gab or Twitter, but they just get a bunch of weird looks and a nice pat on the shoulder telling you, hey, why don't you check that conduct document out again and get back to us. Because it's important. You got to draw the line somewhere. And I think when you have that understanding that that I can be that I'm going to be your friend, I'm going to be in your corner, and I can be friendly with you. But if we're in a situation where there's an objective, we're in a situation where there's a goal, that's not important, right? What comes down to it is what we need to do, because I am going to maintain my professional demeanor, and so is everybody else. Because if we don't do that, then someone's going to get the short end of the stick, right? And someone's going to be caught off guard. Someone's going to be left behind. Someone's going to be in a tough spot. And I think and again, the fact that everybody's involved, everybody's an activist, right? People join the organization, they have all sorts of skills. People have skills for, we have guys who can program radios. We have guys who do website stuff. We have guys who do first aid stuff. We have guys who make music, make videos, make pictures. We have guys who do all sorts of things, but everybody's an activist, right? Everybody goes, everybody marches, everybody commits. And because of that, when it comes down to it, everybody has the same mentality, and brotherhood is just kind of the mortar, right? The social aspect becomes the sort of malleable space between the bricks, when we're building that sort of larger structure. So, you say sociable, but you have rules. And everybody's under those rules. Everybody's equal before the conduct guidelines. Especially me, right? And I try to uphold myself to that most of all. I don't really have, we've seen this with a few other characters and celebrities and, whatever you want to call the movement, the space, the sphere, right? Where they, when the cameras stop rolling, they're a different person, right? But I don't have an off switch, because I have enough trouble remembering all of my actual beliefs without trying to have a second set of imaginary beliefs.
Right.
And I'm this is me. This is what you say. This is what you get. And I think guys really realize that. I think that's how you do it. That's how you do it. You have a strict, you have a strict set of guides on where you draw the line in regards to what people can talk about, what people should talk about. And when push comes to shove, you have an understanding that everybody needs to be on the ball. Everybody needs to, if you get a quick order, if someone's quick with you and they say something, hey, do this, go there, do that really fast. In a usual contemporary, setting, guys might be like, oh, well, I'm offended. Oh, well, you were loud at me, like that. But in our setting, there's stakes. There's something going on. You need to get with it. You signed on, right? So that stuff is just all part of the process. And I think it works.
Yeah, definitely. Pat?
Yeah, I'd like to know if there's like any intentions of you developing kind of let's say parallel institutions eventually? I know that's kind of hard to state considering it is America, and like I mentioned before, it is a
Sure.
surveillance state. But is there any intentions to break into sort of more social and community involvement that coincides sort of with your marches and some of your other
Mhm.
activism?
Um, it's certainly possible. Give me some examples of what you would think in regards to, what would you define as like a parallel institution in that context? Because there a lot of people say things like that, but how would you define that?
Well, for instance, like let's say like food banks, charities, maybe even like homeschool networks for
Hmm.
people within eventually a lot of your people are going to get older, I assume, and you're not just going to kick
Well,
them
I
out of
hope they
the
all get older.
okay. I assume they're not going to just kick them out of the the
No, of
association
course
because
not.
they
Yeah.
age, and eventually they're going to have children. So I think in order to reinforce sort of positive, we could say European American communities,
Yeah.
you're going to need you know, built-in sort of institutions that are able to weather the storm of America, and that's what some of the things I mentioned, and I think also the American kulaks, who I don't know very well. I think they have kind of a credit union based sort of system they're trying to
Hmm.
set up in place. That's what I kind of mean by sort of parallel institutions, and what I meant also is kind of the same model as like Casa Pound, uh, if that model could really work for America.
Sure. Yeah, yeah. So when it comes to some of those things like job networking, especially, when you're talking about young guys, a lot of guys join the organization, they're really young, and they don't have, basic things as far as lifestyle milestones, right? Some guys haven't gotten a certain type of job or they haven't moved out yet. And of course, that's not crazy when you're 18, 19. And we have guys who help them out with that. We help guys if they're looking for a new job. We have people in various fields, and they're more than willing to talk to people. So in terms of job networking, that absolutely happens. It's a little bit, on an informal basis a lot of the time because I'm not going to have a central, I'm not going to collect everything. I'm not going to know what everybody does, and I don't want to. But on a peer-to-peer basis, that is very common. That does happen. And in reference to the sort of family thing, yeah, that's something which is obviously done with the utmost security in mind. But yeah, guys with families, with wives and children, if they're in the same area, they do kind of rally up, and they introduce, and they have they have that kind of structure, that kind of community. Of course it depends, right? Of course it depends, and it's not something which I oversee directly, but I see it happening organically, and that's really, really good. Other things like food banks and things of that nature, obviously setting up anything brick and mortar could be quite the task. In the past, the organization did have a few successful ventures with handing out sort of care supply packages, with basic amenities and things like that to the homeless. And that's actually something I want to get back into this year. So yes, I would say those things are practices that we're doing, and I am pretty familiar with the American Kulak people, and from what I know, of course, I don't know everything, and a lot of the financial stuff goes over my head because I live extremely meagerly. Anything above three digits is beyond my pay grade, quite literally. Um, but yeah, I do think what they're doing is very important, and I think it's good that we have people in various niche cases, because a lot of these institutions, whether they're finance or legal, things of that nature, they're very, you can't just pick it up and do it, right? It's not something that you can just get some guys together and work on. It requires a certain background. It requires a certain
Yeah.
all that sort of thing. So I think it's very good that people are doing that, and I really wish them the best. But yeah, everything on our end that we can do, we absolutely do. And I think a big thing with activism that some people kind of flies over some people's heads. Obviously, y'all are in the know. Y'all are smart. Y'all get it. But activism is the kind of the end of a stream of planning and of resources. The activism that people see, the demonstration, that's at the end of the line of the process. And everything which supports it, that sort of activism effort, all the logistics, the planning, the networks, the communications, the trust. That's really what the activism is built to build. It's built to train people to be organized. It's built to condense people into organized units, to provide a common message, a common goal, and to necessitate rules, structure, discipline, education. And then at the end of all of that structure, you end up with the result, which is activism. And that is our way of showing to the world, look at what we can put together, right? We made these shields. We organized everybody to dress like this. We organized this speech. We organized these columns. We drilled these guys. We found a way to get everybody here, get them here safely, get them in a truck, get them out. It's, all that sort of thing. Now imagine what it took to do all this, right? You can't do that with a bunch of people that just showed up on day one, right? Now imagine what we could do for you. Imagine what we could do for society. Imagine what we do on the back end to support all of these things, to make sure all of these guys have the time, have the information, have the knowledge, and have the ability to lean in to those sorts of things. And that extends into the personal sphere, absolutely. And there are going to be some new initiatives that I want to personally oversee and dedicate my whole heart to, in leaning more into some of those things. But it's all in line. It's not in whether or not we should stop doing activism and start doing these other things, right? I think it's all part of the same big initiative. It's all part of organizing as a mass principle.
Have you guys reached out to, let's say, impoverished areas, let's say like Appalachia, and to help out some of the people there? That's kind of what I meant. I know people get on me for being specific to this region.
Yeah.
A lot of people kind of don't understand it, but really, honestly, I think if you could consolidate a base within places like the Ozarks and places like Appalachia, which still has a kind of predominant white population, albeit it is still facing the same degeneracy and much of the same problems as the rest of the country, but it's especially taxed by, the opiate crisis.
Mm-hmm.
I think you guys would probably have a lot of success there.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
We do have members in those areas. We have members who are in these communities. We have members who, it's starting small, right? There are guys who are job networking in those areas, who are making sure that they and their families, are in the best positions they can be with the resources at hand. So maybe not necessarily setting up a base, as you said, but we do have guys that we are linking together in these areas with those types of backgrounds, like you said. And we are helping them. We are helping their families, and not only we as an organization, but we as in each other. And that I hope has a bit of a reaching out, kind of a radiant effect on their communities. And should more be done? Should we be able to uplift these people even higher? Which I think
just small gestures is what I'm saying.
Yeah,
like small gestures, like handing out food during the holidays, toys,
sure, yeah,
drives, stuff like that. It goes a long way. And from what I
Mhm.
understand, even the National Socialists would do that into the impoverished areas in Germany. And this is probably what led to a lot of their rise and why Germans love them.
Yeah, that's definitely something to consider, and I think we'll try to incorporate that. Absolutely. In one implementation or another, I think that's a big idea, and I think that would coincide with a lot of our objectives this year. Yeah, for sure.
It's just a suggestion. I mean,
a good one.
Unfortunately, Appalachia gets glossed over in a lot of the discussion. I don't know why. It's very white. Unfortunately, it has taken a rather unfortunate turn to the left side. There's quite a bit of leftists that are thriving there now, and lots of degeneracy, lots of pause in that area presently.
Yeah,
it's kind of sad to see.
And a lot of it is just we organize wherever we are. We organize wherever we have the capability. And I think that's a big part of it. And I do really appreciate your suggestions. It's not a bad one at all. And I'm gonna take that to heart. I listened to what you said, and I think I'll do some brainstorming on that tonight. And maybe after the podcast we can butt heads a little bit and see some more ideas. But regarding that in particular, but I think that's a good one. And I think everything the organization does wasn't done on day one. Everything we are doing is a constant adaptation of a previous idea, a previous precedent, a previous tactic or method. So it really is about taking the best ideas on the scene, the ways that we can most appropriately respond to emergencies where something bad might be happening and we need to jump in to help people, or maybe there's an opportunity, maybe something really good is happening and we need to jump in and make sure we're seen, make sure that we're able to positively influence people if they're coming around to a certain idea. And I think being dynamic is really a part of that. So we like it when people come in and they have a lot of ideas. Go ahead.
Well, what I was also going to say is circle back a little bit to you said something about the job networking.
Mhm.
I'm curious, what is your thoughts on like maybe building something like a guild system, kind of an informal sort of network for people that are equally kind of politically sympathetic, to where they can rely upon people for networking? Because I know a
Mhm.
lot of people in the trades, they are especially sympathetic to a lot of, you could say, our views. A lot of them, believe it or
Right.
not, are very sympathetic. They're very patriotic. They're very nationalistic, and they believe in their country. They believe in their family, and they're very traditional in many regards. I'm just wondering, is there any way to implement like kind of a guild system and incorporate that maybe in a nationalist movement?
I Short answer, yes, absolutely. There should be a way. If there isn't already, if there aren't people doing that sort of thing, and of course the organization has its own way of doing things like this, but it is not as formal as you would describe as a formal
Okay.
system.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. I mean
it,
informal.
yeah, it would be it would be a matter of trying to balance a number of things, because on one hand you want people, and this is always the matter with security, you want to balance trust with with information, right? People need to trust each other, but they also need to have certain levels of information. And if you're doing something which requires employment, that's obviously something that you want to keep pretty private to
Yes.
anybody, because you want to protect people. The whole goal is to help
Yes.
people. So it would be a big question as to how you set something up like that up while not disclosing people's information at large, maybe even to each other, right? Because you don't know. And that's been something I've thought about before, because it is a bit of a tough question and it does require some thinking. But I think recent necessities of organizational innovation would be laying the groundwork for something a little bit more formal, because maybe that's something that's called for uniquely now, maybe more than ever. Has it been necessary before? So I think there is a way to do that. I think there is a need for that, and I think there's a lot of value that can be gotten from that if it can be done with diligence and with safety, and with almost a sense of charity and in mind. Absolutely.
Yeah. You've answered my question about that, concerning that.
Could you see Patriot Front working with different organizations on the dissident right? Because we are in a time now where we're starting to see more of these different organizations kind of pop up from out the internet and into life.
Hmm.
Uh, would Patriot Front work with any organization if they co-aligned with beliefs and everything, or is Patriot Front is always going to be its own thing? Like I know you don't know the future, you don't have a crystal
Right.
ball for any of this, but mentality as far as today, where you stand.
Sure. So I have a certain belief about organizing, in that, especially when it comes to leadership, that people making the decisions should always be fully accountable for the decisions that they make. I am fully accountable for the decisions that I make. Whenever something happens that poorly affects the organization or the membership of it, I take personal responsibility. I am hit hardest out of anybody, because that is my job. It's my job to be out at the front. If anything happens, it happens to me first, and in a lot of cases, because I give the most, I spend the most time. But I love that about what I do. I love that I'm able to give and to give and to give. Now, with the question in regards to reiterate the question one more time. I'm sorry.
That since there's other
Yes,
dissident
other
right,
organizations. Yes, yes,
yeah.
yes. So in the short, yes, but we also, because of this accountability, we don't want to be tied up with other organizations. We don't want to be a part of some big coalition, or sort of thing which could prohibit us from making decisions independently. Because if we can't do that, if we have to go through a process of approval with some big, list of organizations, if we want to do something on our own, then our leadership isn't as accountable. So that would be a troublesome thing. But when we're talking about things that are more informal, do we work with other organizations in the sense of mutual support and information sharing, ideas and conversations? Absolutely, that is happening right now. I'm not going to go into detail about who and what and when and where, but yes, and I hope that that in the future more organizations are able to, even if not just simply coexist, but to be able to have some common footing. But also, I think maintaining independence is a very important thing, because a lot of the issues we've seen in years past when it comes to organizations has been where they get too tied up, too jumbled up, and then they start tripping over each other. But I think having so obviously, I'm biased. I think PF's the best, especially when it comes to activism. But of course, I'm going to say that. That's my job. But with other groups, groups doing more niche things, I think there is a very valuable space to do that. And I think having organizations which are able to balance this independence, but also this sort of solidarity with each other, I think that is very valuable. And so working together within that context, I think we are doing that. We are going to keep doing that. And I think other people should be doing that as well. I think it's going to be very beneficial, if not necessary.
What motivation could you think of if there was a dissident right group out there that was spending its time attacking other dissident right groups? Like, what could that motivation be, instead of like focused on the system, the enemy, and everything else?
Well, I wouldn't know, because I've never seen that happen. No, jokes aside. Yeah. Well, I think a lot of people.
Ego? Is it petty? Is it like, or is it malicious? Is it COINTELPRO?
Competition.
I think in a lot of cases people get into the radical side of politics, and it's technically not radical. What we believe is natural law, and it's very inherent. But comparatively, it is radical. Comparatively, we are outside of the norm. And it's almost a symptom of the echo chambers that form as a result of that people forget the larger scale. People forget the larger context that we're in. And your opponents become the only people that are within reach that you can bicker with, that you can argue with. And I think it's important. And one of the big things that our activism does is it puts us in a larger context. It puts us physically in a larger context where we can see that, you may have your disagreements with these people on social media, these other nationalists, whatever you want to say. You may even have your disagreements with other members of the organization, right? The guys that you're with. But when we go out there and our true opposition shows up, right? The screeching, the screaming, the slimy, the disgusting, that makes it clear what the lines are and what the differences are. And I think as organizations either begin to do more activism, or as more men individually, join the organization and begin to do more activism, and other organizations witness our activism and come to a better, they don't have to support everything we do, but they have to at least understand why we do it. I think that is something that's going to change. I think it's perspective. A lot of people, they have their arguments, they have their interests, sometimes it's personal. A lot of the times people have their personal issues. I try not to make anything about what I do personal, because I don't have a personal interest. My interest is that of the organization. I want the organization to succeed. There's nothing in which I would ever put a personal interest over that of the organization. So it's almost effectively as if I don't have one. And I think that selfless attitude is something which has been very beneficial to me. I think some other people, bless their hearts, I see them making these silly arguments. I see them being a little bit opportunistic sometimes with their arguments, denouncing other people, other organizations, not us, just sometimes us, but other people as well. And I think that's something that they could really benefit from. Not to sound preachy, but I do have a lot of experience. I think I think it is something which could hopefully be implemented, and I think a lot of people are seeing it that way.
Indeed. Pat, we're hour 40 minutes into this.
Yeah, I think we should probably wind it down.
Or open up the Q&A for the chat.
Yeah. Let's open up the Q&A for the chat. Wow, there's some spicy stuff in the.
I'm
be
sure
respectful
Chat.
for your questions, guys.
Yes, please
Yeah.
don't be a troll. Please be respectful to the guest.
I see what you're talking about, though,
This
Thomas.
is not
I
a
have
troll
noticed the
stream.
chat.
Yeah,
I have noticed.
well, you know.
I have noticed the chat a little bit.
I warned
That's a
you.
new thing. That's a new thing. The other 2 times we never had that. It was all good. But this is a sign. You're just getting more popular. That's all that is.
Yes, well, we have some of our biggest fans in the chat right
Yes.
now, I'm sure.
Well,
I'm
I
sure.
would ask you one question though that keeps reoccurring. What is NSC? What is this? And who is this person that people are claiming was expelled from your group? If you could answer that, I mean, if you don't have to, but
Sure.
Are they the guys out of Massachusetts? Is that them?
I'm sure that's who they're referring to.
Okay.
I don't want to discuss anything to do with that.
Okay.
I'm
I was just wondering.
I'm sure.
It just keeps
I'm sure
reoccurring.
I'm sure the people in the comment section will be happy to set aside their differences for the sake of the stream.
Yeah.
You know, there's more shared. You know, there's more shared than there is different. And I hope that everything I said in the last few questions were actually very relevant to the subject, and I hope people were listening in their breaks between furiously typing at each other, and maybe they can put some of that into practice. You know, I of course wish no harm or ill will on anybody. You know, and you know. So yeah, that would be as far as I go with that. As far as that goes,
See, that's why, Pat, I asked that question without saying the name. That's what
I understand. I understand.
well, the answer is roughly the same. Yeah, of course.
Yes, I know it is. I know. Yeah, but yeah. So at the killing field, so we can see the question, and if you have questions for Thomas before he heads out, before we wrap this down, throw it in the chat now.
Yeah, definitely throw it in the chat and
speak now or forever hold your peace.
If it's sensible, we'll definitely air it. If it's not, we'll definitely ignore it. So ask sensible questions. Now is your time to ask Thomas Rousseau all the questions you wish to ask him about his organization, about his mission, his his vision. Now is the time to forever speak or hold your peace.
Oh, they'll be there for the next podcast. Don't worry.
I'm
there will be more opportunities. No, I hope there's some sensible comments. I think some of my best podcasting, my best interviews actually come from times when I'm able to engage with the audience. Of course, with the sensible and audience. Go ahead.
Here's one. He's asking, "What's your thoughts on third position economics?" I think he means corporatism and distributionism and stuff like that.
Yeah. So I think obviously I have a number of opinions on economics. I'm not an aficionado, right? I'm not an expert on economics. I'm not really the person to ask. But in general principle, I do not believe in capitalism. I do not believe in communism, Marxism. I think that the economy should exist to serve the nation, or the nation will exist to serve the economy. So I think obviously the former is the ideal. I believe in kind of a anti-materialism. I think that these material things, money and stuff like that, is not what defines value in the strict sense. I think the real things of value that we strive for, our family, community, brotherhood, sovereignty and liberty. You can't put a price on those things. So anything material, in the material sense, when you're talking economy, when you're talking practices, that needs to exist in context with where the value is derived from. Someone can have $1 million and you could only use it for hedonism and debauchery or exploitation. That isn't as valuable as a single dime that a man might use to feed his family. So that's where I stand as far as materialism. And as far as the specific economic principles of the theories that you listed, I can't speak to them directly. I'm not necessarily familiar with those sorts of things, but I will say that the organization kind of writes its own policy. When it comes to action and organizing, we don't have a donor class. We don't have, rich members who pay for everything. Everybody is largely contributing at the same rate, out of the same, interest, and people are held to the same standard. So I that's kind of our way of implementing that sort of policy on the contemporary sense. And another thing, we try to put that into practice. And I saw someone mention it. when it comes into the ideals that we espouse in public and also our internal practices. I spoke earlier about the the relationship with the police and that sort of thing. And I want to make it clear that the organization has never made any sort of emergency calls to the police or any other calls for that matter. And that was only discussed in one or maybe two instances in a theoretical context of being the alternative to engaging in some sort of big knife fight with unknown assailants in a hypothetical context. Obviously that was the discussion of if people are going around trying to slash and burn, should a small group of people either, directly engage in some sort of deadly contact or do something else. And that was the proposed thing, but that never came into effect. Obviously, we were able to mitigate that and make sure that didn't happen. And then another point, every time that we show up on the ground, usually, especially in cities like Washington and Chicago, it's a pretty understood sort of dynamic between us and the police where we show up on the ground and the police, either in a car or in a motorcycle or someone, will walk up and they'll say, all right, who's the leader? Who do I talk to? Who do I talk to? Right. And usually the guys will point to me. The officer will walk up and say, hey, what are you doing here? What's going on? And I'll say what I always say. I'm not cooperating with them, but I'll say that we are here exercising our First Amendment. We are here to march. We are here to speak, and then we will be leaving on our own accord. We are not here to harm people or property, right? And they barely need to know that. I'm sure they already do, but it's good to have it stated. And those are publicly known things. That's not insider information in any context. And I think that's good. I think it's good to have that sort of disposition made very known up front with the police, because the police they're not there to protect us. They're not there to protect anyone. The police are there to protect the interests of the state. And oftentimes, the interests of the state coincide with not having massive brawls in your streets. And I am okay with that, generally. The interests of the state can also coincide with harming activists or harassing us. We saw that in Philadelphia. But it is a dynamic situation. The police departments in different cities are different. And, they're all on their own side. They're all on the side of the government. But you can expect different dispositions and levels of hostility from them, depending on where you're going and what the circumstances are. And we've learned that in various ways. In another instance, it was discussed, again, in the hypothetical sense, this wasn't actually done, that when we touched off in DC, a not necessarily fake, but not, emergency call could be made to the police saying, hey, I just saw a bunch of Patriot Front guys show up in this area, and they don't seem to have any weapons, and they're not hurting anybody, but it looks like they're marching around. You should be aware of this, which is pretty much exactly what I say whenever one of them comes up to me in person, and that was discussed as a means to kind of soften the initial interaction or the first contact, if you will, because that's always the roughest part with police. Is they're kind of like bears. You don't want to surprise them. You don't want to sneak up on them, or they might react like crazy, violent, ridiculous. And usually getting that first kind of posture very apparent that we are here and our general temperament, what we're here to do, and you're not really going to stop us. That's very important. So those were the only contexts in which that was ever discussed. The organization does not cooperate with police. The organization has never had any sort of digital communications with police officers. I do sometimes, speak with police in person at these events, and that's always recorded. That oftentimes that ends up in the videos. In DC, I had to speak with the cops, as we were waiting for our vehicles because they had a roadblock set up, and I had to make known that, hey, if you want us gone, and they did want us gone, there's going to be this kind of vehicle showing up, and you're going to want to let that one through. If not, there's, it's going to be an issue. But it's a matter of understanding that when we show up to a city, we want to be a much bigger mess for them to deal with if they try to stop us than if they just let us do what we came there to do. And that mutual understanding exists in some of these bigger cities that we frequent more often. And I think that's going to be important for the organization to make more concrete moving forward. Because when we do that, when we bend those boundaries, when we break the norm, not the law, but the norm, we are able to create space in which not only we, but other groups can organize within more comfortably, with more breathing room, as it were.
Okay, there's another question. I think this person has been waiting.
Sure.
There has been a drift away from the confrontational protesting to more uplifting types of protesting. What realization made you guys move in this direction?
That's an interesting question. I would say that a lot of it comes down to functionality. It's a lot easier to make our protests about our message instead of trying to find and coordinate a protest against others. Risk is also a factor. Timing and location. There's a lot of specifics. But is that to say that we're not going to have protests? There's you could argue there's a difference in a demonstration and a protest. Is that to say that we're gonna stop having those? I don't think so. I think this last year has been very, very filled to the brim with kind of standalone demonstrations where the message is more unique and positive towards us. And I think that is always going to be the majority of our actions. But as opportunities present for a safe way to effectively protest or counter something else, I think we will do our best to act upon those. It's a lot of it's about the specifics, but it's a balance, and we always want our message to be more positively oriented because our time is very valuable. Every word that we can get in is very valuable, and we want to make sure that is going towards explaining who we are, what we do, and what we believe, not necessarily spending an inordinate amount of time delivering that to others, even if it is to discredit them, even if it is effective.
Let's see what else. I don't want to answer any questions about particular, like other popular groups or popular figures. I think that's a bit of waste of time and a bit of gossip.
Sure, yeah,
So
we can
let's
veer
talk
away from
about
that.
strategy. I'm just saying some of the people in the chat are asking stuff, but the usual chats. This one person is asking, what exactly is the long-term goal or ideal behind Patriot Front?
Yes. So ultimately, we say it in the manifesto, we say it on the website, and a few other places: collective liberty and national sovereignty. Now, collective liberty is that which is reserved exclusively for the nation. It is the people, having a collective mindset that we are Americans. Americans are, the descendants of the European pioneers. We are a unique cultural heritage group. We are a collective, and that after realizing that, we will collectively ensure our rights. Our rights to certain freedoms, to certain liberties. Where we are able to associate, we are able to build, we are able to live our positive lifestyles. That is something we assure on the side of the nation. Now, once that is the case, national sovereignty is reflected by a state that represents that nation made collective. And that is ultimately a government which exists by and for and within the dimensions of that nation, of that heritage group. Not a government which exists, governing over the span of multiple nations or continents or nonsense like we have today. So ultimately, a representative government and a people ensured in their natural heritage and rights. And everything in between then and now is a process of organizing, of creating order out of chaos, and of building legitimacy with revolutionary spaces and organization that proves to that same people, A, that we are this unique heritage group, and B, that there is an opportunity, or even not more than an opportunity, there is a space currently in which rules are being made, structure is being developed that is parallel to or even better than the space that the government has arranged for us, and is more viable, more available.
Okay, last question, and then I think we should probably wrap this up. And that is, what do you feel is the biggest obstacle you face presently?
I suppose, as an organization, the biggest obstacle we face, I would say, not just as an organization, but I think as a people, The biggest obstacle is despair. It's despondency. It is the sort of comfortable inaction. It is the notion of normal, which, doesn't actually exist. Normal has been murdered by the government and by the media, by the corporations. Normal is a figment of their imagination, and they want to sell it to you. The idea that people should not take action, the idea of despair and of fear, that is the greatest obstacle. And our actions are meant to inspire, because inspiration is the greatest weapon against hopelessness. And I would say, if we can attract hope for a better future, as cliche as that sounds, within our people broadly, the rest is just details. But instilling that hope in people, and convincing people that that a diligent, strong collective of men, however small, can change the world. That's the center principle. And I think that is the cure to despair, which I would say is the greatest issue facing us and our people today.
Okay. I just have one more question myself, actually, before
Sure.
we kind of wrap this up. What is your what do you what constitutes as a heritage American? And would like someone that is like an Italian be welcome in that class? I know it's
Sure, yeah,
silly,
yeah.
but I'm,
Some of my
people, someone
favorite
asked
members
that.
are some of my favorite
Yeah.
members have Italian ancestry, but they are not Italian. They are American. There are no hyphenated Americans. So obviously, to be an American is to be a descendant of the conquerors, the pioneers, the settlers that arrived from Europe, and participated in America's founding. Now, America's founding, I believe, lasted a very long time, and it is even possible for those of European racial heritage to assimilate to the nation after that point. Um, you know, I am not a purveyor of some sort of racialist magic dirt theory. I think that someone from Europe touching down in America does not immediately become American. They do not become American with citizenship. To be an American is a cultural, as well as a biological factor. And you have to believe, you have to have that cause, you have to have that cultural resonance. Um, and all members of the organization are of this cultural resonance, and they're also of this heritage. We believe America is one of the many nations of the European racial collective. And uniquely, it is also one of the nations of the European diaspora. And can Europeans or members from other nations of the diaspora assimilate into American, the American nation? Yes, exactly how it depends, of course, on where they're coming from and how dedicated they are to this assimilation. And we do have members who have had ancestors who are first generation from a number of these countries, or we have ancestors who arrived on the Mayflower, right, and everything in between. So I believe that answers the question.
Okay.
Mhm.
I think that about does it. I will say this. Thank you guys. Thanks, Thomas, for stopping by. Thanks, CT.
Where
Uh,
can they find you? Where can they find Patriot Front, Thomas? Before we wrap this up.
Hopefully on a street pole near you. But if that doesn't work, you can visit us at patriotfront.us. On Telegram, we are Patriot Front Updates, capital P, capital F, capital U. On Gab and Odyssey and BitChute, we are Patriot Front. Should be pretty easy to find in that context. And if that fails, there's a list of icons at the very bottom of patriotfront.us, which should link you to a number of those.
and also want to remind people that in the future we will have pop-on chats and pop-a-top chats. You know what that means. We will also have more lively interviews, hopefully more debates, more to come from the Killing Fields. Thank you all for tuning in, and thanks CT and thanks Thomas.
Thanks for
And
having me.
we're out.
All right, good night, everybody.
Good night.
Cheers.